I've been a long-time reader of true, scary stories. I never thought I'd have my own to share. But here I am, typing this out in my new place, miles away from where my story happened. I guess I'm hoping that by sharing what I went through, I might find some closure or maybe warn someone else. So, here it goes. I moved to a suburban neighborhood about 6 months ago. After a break-in at my previous apartment in the city, I was desperate for a sense of safety. This little neighborhood, with its tree-lined streets and friendly waves, seemed perfect. I'm a freelance graphic designer, so I work from home, which made the quiet and peace all the more appealing. At first, everything was idyllic. I'd take walks in the evening, nodding at neighbors and feeling a part of something wholesome. That's how I first met Alex. He lived a few houses down and was always out walking his dog. He was friendly, a bit too friendly in hindsight, with a quick smile and a lot of questions about my life. The first sign that something was off was subtle, so subtle that I convinced myself I was imagining things. My garden decorations were moved slightly, not enough to be sure, but just a feeling I had. I brushed it off as forgetfulness. Then came the gifts. A series of small packages were left on my doorstep. No note, just little trinkets or flowers. It was kind of sweet at first, in a secret admirer way, but with no one coming forward, it quickly turned creepy. I mentioned these odd gifts to Alex in passing, thinking maybe he'd heard something or seen someone. He just gave me this strange look, a mix of concern and something else I couldn't place, and suggested maybe it was just a friendly neighbor. But then, I started noticing someone lurking around my house at night. I'd catch glimpses of a shadow moving past my windows or hear the crunch of gravel underfoot in my backyard. Each time I'd go to check, flashlight in hand, I'd find nothing. I told myself it was just the wind or a neighborhood cat, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The breaking point came one evening. I was working late in my home office when I heard it, a clear, unmistakable sound of someone trying to open my back door. I froze. Every horror story I'd ever read flashed through my mind. Gathering my courage, I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and approached the back door. By the time the police arrived, whoever it was had gone. They found signs of tampering with the lock, but no other evidence. They suggested I install security cameras, and I did, right the next day. The cameras changed everything. It didn't take long to catch the shadow on film. It was Alex, no doubt about it, trying to peer in through my windows at night, lingering in my backyard long after any reasonable person should be asleep. Seeing the footage chilled me to the bone. This man, who'd smiled and chatted with me, was stalking me in the most creepy way. I confronted Alex the next day. I needed to see his reaction and hear his explanation. He just laughed it off, saying he was just making sure I was safe and that there was nothing to worry about. But the look in his eyes told a different story. It was a look of possession, of obsession. The gift stopped, but the lurking didn't. If anything, it got worse. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, with curtains always drawn and jumping at every little sound. One night, it all came to a head. I was jolted awake by an alert on my phone, a motion detected by one of my cameras. Heart pounding, I checked the feed. There he was, Alex, trying to pick the lock on my back door again. But this time, I was ready. The police arrived in minutes, catching him red-handed. The aftermath was a blur of restraining orders, court dates, and finally, moving away. I couldn't stay there, not with every shadow reminding me of those nights. Reflecting on it now, I realize how much it's changed me. I'm more cautious and less trusting, but also, strangely, more resilient. I've learned to listen to that little voice inside that says something's wrong, and to trust my instincts over appearances. To anyone out there who might be experiencing something similar, know that you're not alone. There are ways to protect yourself and fight back. And to the rest of you, remember to look out for one another. Sometimes the monsters live next door. Thanks for letting me share my story. If it helps even one person, then it's worth it. Stay safe. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was late for work, which isn't anything new for me. But this particular morning, my tardiness was about to set off a chain of events. I was weaving through traffic, admittedly more recklessly than usual, when I made a split-second decision to cut into a small gap on my left. What I didn't realize was that the car I cut off was an unmarked police vehicle. And the driver? A police officer who, as I would come to find out, had a short fuse and a vendetta against anyone who dared to cross him on the road. The moment I slipped into the lane, the car's sirens blared and the lights flashed, an unmistakable sign that I was being pulled over. Heart pounding, I guided my car to the side of the road, cursing under my breath for the unnecessary addition to my already late morning. The officer approached my window, his expression stern and unforgiving. He didn't introduce himself and didn't ask for my license or registration. Instead, he leaned in close and, with a voice laced with barely contained rage, told me I was going to regret making him my enemy. His words were like a cold slap to the face, waking me up to the gravity of the situation I had unknowingly stumbled into. I tried to apologize and explain my rush, but he wasn't having any of it. He took down my details, his eyes never leaving mine, and then let me off with a warning that felt more like a threat. I drove off, shaken, telling myself that the encounter was over and that he was just trying to scare me. How wrong I was. The next day, I saw him again. I was on my lunch break, sitting in a cafe, when I spotted the same unmarked police car parked across the street. It could have been a coincidence, I thought, trying to brush off the unease creeping into my gut. But when I left the cafe, the car followed me. Everywhere I went, there it was, lurking a few cars back, a silent, menacing presence. By the time I got home, panic had set in. This couldn't be a coincidence. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little sound had me peering out the window, half expecting to see him standing there. But it wasn't until the following day that things really escalated. I found a note on my car, simple and to the point. Watch yourself. No signature, no explanation. But none was needed. I knew who it was from. This game of cat and mouse continued for almost a week. I'd see his car at all hours, near my work, my home, and even the gym. I received more notes, each one more threatening than the last. I was being watched, followed, and stalked by someone who was supposed to protect and serve. The stress was unbearable. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and couldn't focus on anything but the fear of what might happen next. I went to the police, of course, but without solid evidence, they said there was little they could do. It was my word against that of a respected officer, they said. I felt helpless, trapped in a nightmare with no end in sight. One evening, I was driving home from work. The officer's car appeared in my rearview mirror, following closer than ever before. My heart raced as I took turn after turn, trying to lose him, but it was no use. Eventually, he forced me off the road, cornering me in a deserted parking lot. I braced myself as he got out of his car and approached mine. This was it, I thought. But instead of the confrontation I was expecting, he just stood there staring at me through the window for what felt like an eternity. Then, without a word, he turned around, got back in his car, and drove off. I never saw him again after that night. I don't know if he got what he wanted, if he got scared off, or if he simply got bored. But I didn't stick around to find out. I requested a transfer at work, moved to a new city, and started over. It was the only way I could think of to escape the constant fear of looking over my shoulder. Reflecting on it now, I realize how lucky I am. Things could have ended much worse. This story is something my buddy Mike and I experienced a few years back. We've told it to a handful of friends, but I figured it would be fitting to share it with the True Tales and Thrills YouTube channel. Mike and I have been hunting together since we were teenagers. We know each other's moves and can predict each other's thoughts in the woods. It's that kind of friendship that doesn't need words. One fall, we decided to go rabbit hunting in the swamps of Louisiana. We'd heard stories about how thick the fog could get and how it could disorient even the most experienced hunter. But we were young and cocky and figured we could handle whatever the swamp threw at us. That morning, visibility was no more than a few feet in front of us. Everything looked the same, the twisted trees and murky water blending into a grayscale world. We moved slowly, listening for the rustle of rabbits, but all we heard was our own breathing and the occasional distant splash of water. A couple of hours in, we started to notice odd sounds, footsteps that weren't in sync with ours, branches snapping from a direction we hadn't taken. At first, we brushed it off as the noise of the swamp, maybe a deer or another hunter. But as time passed, the sounds grew closer and more deliberate. It felt like we were being mirrored by something just beyond our sight. "Mike," I whispered, "do you hear that?" He nodded, his eyes scanning the fog. "Yeah, let's circle back and see if we can catch a glimpse of our tail." We changed direction, trying to be as silent as possible, but no matter which way we went, the sounds followed, always just out of sight. It was like something was stalking us, but every time we stopped to listen, it stopped too. The silence that followed was stifling, heavy with anticipation. We decided to head back to the truck. This wasn't fun anymore. The swamp felt hostile, like we'd wandered into something we weren't supposed to. But as we made our way back, the feeling of being followed intensified. We'd catch glimpses of movement through the fog, a shadow that seemed too upright to be an animal, but too quick to be human. "Mike, this is messed up," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Let's pick up the pace." We started moving faster, hearing the sounds of pursuit keeping pace. That's when the whispering started. It was so soft at first that I thought I was imagining it, just the wind or my mind playing tricks on me. But Mike heard it too, a low murmur that seemed to come from all around us, words indistinguishable but undeniably human. Panic set in then, a deep-seated fear that I'd never felt before. We were running now, the footsteps echoing our own. I dared a glance back and saw it, a figure shrouded in fog, indistinct but unmistakably there. We burst out of the swamp and into the clearing where we'd parked, our lungs burning and our hearts pounding. We didn't stop to look back. We didn't stop to talk. We just jumped into the truck and drove. It was only when we'd put miles between us and the swamp that we dared to speak. What was that? Who was that? Questions without answers. We talked about going to the authorities, but what would we say? That we were chased by whispers and shadows? We'd sound insane. So we kept it to ourselves and told the story only to those who would listen. To this day, Mike and I haven't gone back to that swamp. We haven't even considered it.